The heavy wooden door of Carnegie Hall's backstage area swung open, and a woman in her early 50s stepped inside. She wore a simple navy blue dress that looked like it came from a department store clearance rack, and her graying hair was tied back in a ponding that had seen better days. A worn leather backpack hung from one shoulder, the kind students carry to college, not the kind you'd expect to see in one of the world's most prestigious concert halls. She paused for a moment, taking in the sight of the long corridor lined with black and white photos of legendary musicians who had graced this stage over the past century. Her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the backpack strap. This was really happening. After all these years, she was actually here. "Excuse me, are you here for the auditions?" A young assistant with a clipboard appeared from around the corner, looking slightly confused. The woman nodded, and the assistant's confusion seemed to deepen. "Right this way, please." "You're, contestant number 47. The way the assistant said it made it clear what she was thinking. This woman didn't look like the other contestants who had been arriving all morning in their expensive performance attire, carrying professional instrument cases, exuding confidence and youth. This woman looked like someone's mom who had wandered in by mistake. They walked down the corridor in silence, their footsteps echoing off the walls. Through the open doors of practice rooms, the woman could hear scales being run, difficult passages being perfected, the sounds of serious musicians preparing for serious auditions. Her heart pounded harder with each step. What was she thinking? It had been 30 years. 30 years since she'd played in front of anyone except her students and her own living room walls. The assistant stopped at a door marked Audition Room A and knocked twice before pushing it open. "Your next contestant is here," she announced, then stepped aside to let the woman enter. The room was smaller than expected, but still intimidating. 3 people sat behind a long table on the far side, bathed in the harsh light of overhead fluorescence. On the left was a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into an elegant bun, wearing glasses on a gold chain. In the middle sat a man who looked to be in his 70s, completely bald with the kind of stern expression that suggested he'd heard everything and been impressed by very little. On the right was a younger woman, maybe in her 30s, who at least managed a polite smile. "Please come in," the man in the middle said without looking up from his papers. "State your name and the piece you'll be performing." The woman walked toward the grand piano that dominated the center of the room, its black lacquer surface reflecting the lights above. She cleared her throat. "My name is Rebecca Walsh. I'll be playing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 in C minor. Just the first movement, of course." Now all 3 judges looked up. The older woman's eyebrows rose slightly. The man's stern expression shifted to something between surprise and skepticism. Even the younger judge seemed taken aback. "That's quite an ambitious choice," the older woman said carefully, the kind of careful that meant, "Are you sure about this?" Rebecca smiled, and there was something self-aware about it, almost apologetic. "Well, I figure if I'm going to embarrass myself, might as well go big, right? I mean, I'm already 52. At this point, humiliation builds character." The judges chuckled politely. It was a practiced laugh, the kind they'd perfected over years of auditions, designed to put nervous performers at ease while maintaining professional distance. The younger judge wrote something on her notepad. The man glanced at his watch briefly. They'd seen this before. Older amateur musicians, usually coming out of retirement or trying to fulfill some long-abandoned dream. They meant well. They loved music, but they rarely had the technical skill for the pieces they chose. And they certainly didn't have what it took for Carnegie Hall's summer concert series. "Whenever you're ready," the man said, settling back in his chair with the posture of someone preparing to sit through something tolerable but unexceptional. Rebecca walked to the piano bench and set her backpack down beside it. She adjusted the bench with a practiced twist of the knobs on either side, raising it slightly, then sliding it back a few inches. Her movements were efficient, automatic, the muscle memory of someone who had done this countless times. The older woman judge leaned over and whispered something to the man. He nodded slightly, smirking. They'd already made up their minds about how this would go. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know from looking at this ordinary woman in her ordinary dress with her ordinary backpack, was the story behind how she came to be sitting at this piano. 33 years ago, Rebecca had been 21 years old and standing on a different stage in a different country, accepting first place at one of the world's most prestigious piano competitions. Her name had been in newspapers. Critics called her a once-in-a-generation talent. Record labels wanted to sign her. Symphony orchestras wanted to feature her. The world of classical music lay before her like an open road stretching to the horizon. Then life happened, the way it always does. Her husband got sick. Not the kind of sick that you recover from with rest and medication, the kind that requires years of treatment, of hope and disappointment, of medical bills that pile up faster than you can count them, the kind that makes you realize some things are more important than concert halls and standing ovations. She'd put away her dreams without much drama. It wasn't a sacrifice in her mind, not really. It was just life. You do what needs to be done. You take care of the people you love. You find other ways to keep music in your life. So she became a piano teacher in a small town in Iowa, 3 hours from any major city. She taught kids their scales and teenagers their Chopin. She played at local recitals and church services. She poured everything she had once saved for the concert stage into her students, watching them grow, watching them discover the same magic she had found in music all those years ago. Her husband passed away 7 years ago. By then, her 3 kids were teenagers with their own lives, their own dreams to chase. She kept teaching, kept living quietly, and told herself she was content. And mostly she was. Then 2 months ago, one of her former students sent her a message. The student had gone on to study music in college, was now playing professionally. "Mrs. Walsh," the message said, "I saw this audition announcement for Carnegie Hall. I know you always told us to never give up on our dreams, but what about yours? When are you going to take your own advice?" It was meant as a joke, probably. A gentle tease from a student who remembered her teacher fondly. But the question lodged itself in Rebecca's mind and wouldn't leave. Her youngest had just left for college that fall. For the first time in 30 years, the house was empty. For the first time in 30 years, no one needed her to be anywhere, to do anything, to be anything other than herself. She'd laughed when she filled out the audition application. Laughed at the absurdity of it. Laughed at herself for even considering it. But she sent it in anyway, and when they accepted her audition, when they gave her a time slot, she'd bought a bus ticket to New York City, packed her backpack, and gotten on the bus like she was 21 again and the world was full of possibilities. Now here she was, sitting at this piano, while 3 judges who didn't know her story waited with barely concealed impatience for her to begin and inevitably fail. Rebecca placed her hands on the keys. They fit there like they'd never left, like coming home after a very long journey. She took one deep breath, closed her eyes for just a moment, and began to play. The first notes came out soft and gentle, almost hesitant. Rebecca's fingers moved across the keys with a lightness that seemed to match her unassuming appearance. The older woman judge glanced at the man beside her with an expression that said, "Here we go," just as expected. But then something shifted. The gentle opening began to build, and Rebecca's hands started moving faster. Not just faster, but with a precision that made the younger judge sit up a little straighter in her chair. The notes weren't just being played correctly. They were being played with intention, with understanding, with a depth that spoke of years spent not just practicing but living inside this music. The melody climbed higher, more intense, and Rebecca's whole body began to move with it. Her shoulders swayed slightly. Her back straightened. It was like watching someone transform right there on the bench, shedding the nervous middle-aged woman who had walked in and revealing something else entirely underneath. The man in the middle stopped looking at his watch. His pen, which had been moving across his notepad in what was probably a half-interested doodle, froze in midair. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. He leaned forward. Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto is not a piece for amateurs. It's not even really a piece for regular professionals. It demands everything from a pianist. Your hands have to stretch across intervals that seem impossible. Your fingers have to move independently at speeds that shouldn't be humanly possible. You need power for the crashing chords and delicacy for the whisper-soft passages, sometimes switching between them in the span of a single measure. And Rebecca was playing it like she'd written it herself. Her left hand drove the bass notes with a force that you could feel in your chest, while her right hand danced through the melody with a lightness that seemed to defy physics. The difficult runs that trip up even conservatory-trained pianists flowed from her fingers like water. Not a single note was missed. Not a single phrase felt rushed or uncertain. The older woman judge removed her glasses slowly, as if she needed to see this more clearly, as if the glasses were somehow distorting what was happening in front of her. She looked at Rebecca, then at the piano, then back at Rebecca, trying to reconcile what she was hearing with what she was seeing. "Is this actually happening?" the younger judge whispered, so quietly that it was barely audible over the music. The piece moved into one of its most technically demanding sections, a cascade of notes that tumbled over each other in rapid succession. This was the part where pianists usually slowed down just slightly, just enough to get through it without mistakes. Rebecca didn't slow down. If anything, she seemed to speed up, her fingers flying across the keys with such speed that they blurred. Yet every single note rang out crystal clear, each one distinct and purposeful. The man in the middle set his pen down completely and just watched. His stern expression had melted away, replaced by something that looked almost like disbelief. In his 40 years of judging auditions, in his decades of teaching at Juilliard, in all his experience in the classical music world, he'd heard this piece played hundreds of times, maybe thousands. He'd heard it played by talented students and accomplished professionals and even a few genuine masters. But this was different. This wasn't just technical perfection, though it was certainly that. This was something else. There was emotion in every phrase, a kind of longing and joy and sadness all mixed together. It was the sound of someone who hadn't just learned this music, but who had lived with it, carried it inside them like a secret for years and years. Rebecca's eyes were closed now. She wasn't reading music. She knew every note by heart. Her face showed the emotion of what she was playing, her eyebrows furrowing during the intense passages, her lips curving into the smallest smile during the beautiful melodic sections. She swayed with the rhythm, her whole upper body moving as if the music was flowing through her rather than from her. The younger judge pulled out her phone, her fingers moving frantically across the screen. She typed something into the search bar, then her eyes went wide. She turned the phone toward the older woman judge, showing her the screen. The older woman looked, and her hand went to her mouth. On the screen was an old newspaper article from 1992. The headline read, "American Pianist Stuns European Competition." Below it was a photo of a young woman, maybe 20 or 21, holding a trophy and smiling at the camera. The woman in the photo had dark hair and smooth skin and the brightness of youth in her eyes, but there was no mistaking those features. It was Rebecca, 33 years younger, but definitely her. The older woman scrolled down quickly, reading as fast as she could while trying not to miss any of the performance happening right in front of her. There were more articles. Reviews from her performances with major symphony orchestras. Mentions of record deals being negotiated. Critics calling her the most promising pianist of her generation. And then, around 1994, the articles just stopped. It was like she had vanished from the classical music world completely. The man noticed the commotion with the phone and leaned over to look. His eyes scanned the article and his expression changed from confusion to understanding to something that might have been respect. He sat back in his chair and closed his eyes, just listening now, letting the music wash over him without any judgment or analysis, just experiencing it. Rebecca moved into the slower, more lyrical middle section of the movement. Her touch became softer, gentler, each note placed with such care that it felt like she was telling a story. And maybe she was. Maybe this was the story of all those years teaching in that small Iowa town. Maybe it was the story of sitting by a hospital bed, holding her husband's hand, knowing that some choices matter more than fame. Maybe it was the story of every time she sat at her own piano late at night after her children were asleep, playing the same piece quietly to herself, remembering who she used to be and wondering who she might have become. The music built again, rising from that gentle middle section back into power and intensity. Rebecca's hands moved faster, the chords becoming fuller, richer, more complex. This was the part that required not just technical skill but physical stamina. Your arms start to ache, your shoulders burn, your fingers want to cramp up. But Rebecca played like she was just getting started, like she had endless reserves of energy stored up from 3 decades of not playing publicly, and now it was all pouring out at once. The climax of the movement approached. The notes built higher and higher, louder and louder. Rebecca's entire body was engaged now, leaning into the piano for the powerful chords, pulling back for the lighter touches. Sweat beaded on her forehead. A strand of gray hair escaped from her ponytail and fell across her face, but she didn't stop to brush it away. Nothing existed except her and the piano and Rachmaninoff's music filling the room. The three judges sat completely still, barely breathing. The assistant who had brought Rebecca in had stepped back into the room at some point and stood frozen by the door, her clipboard hanging forgotten at her side, her mouth open, and Rebecca played on, lost somewhere deep inside the music, in a place she hadn't allowed herself to visit in 30 years. She played like someone who had been holding their breath for 3 decades and was finally allowed to breathe again. She played like she was 21 years old on a stage in Europe with the whole world watching. She played like she was 52 years old in a small town, teaching a student their first real piece. She played like all the versions of herself at once, every Rebecca she had ever been coming together in this one moment, in this one room, at this one piano. The movement raced toward its conclusion. The final passages flew by in a blur of black and white keys of sound and silence, of everything she had given up and everything she had gained. Her hands moved in perfect synchronization, the years falling away until there was no difference between the prodigy she had been and the teacher she had become. They were the same person. They had always been the same person. And then, with one final, powerful chord that seemed to shake the very air in the room, she stopped. Her hands lifted from the keys and hovered there for a moment, as if reluctant to break contact. Then slowly she lowered them to her lap. She sat very still, her eyes still closed, her chest rising and falling with deep breaths. The room was absolutely silent. Not a sound. Not a movement. Just silence, heavy and complete, hanging in the air like smoke. The silence stretched on. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15. Rebecca finally opened her eyes and looked down at her hands as if surprised to find them there. Surprised to find herself sitting at this piano in this room. She seemed almost confused, like someone waking up from a very long dream. Then the man in the middle stood up. Just stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. The sound broke the spell. The older woman beside him rose too, and then the younger judge, all 3 of them on their feet. And then they started clapping, not polite applause, not the courteous recognition they gave to adequate performances. This was real applause. The kind that comes from somewhere deep in your chest, the kind you can't hold back even if you wanted to. The man's hands came together hard, the sound echoing through the room. The older woman had tears running down her cheeks, not bothering to wipe them away. The younger judge clapped and shook her head at the same time, like she couldn't quite believe what she'd just witnessed. The assistant by the door joined in, clapping so enthusiastically that her clipboard clattered to the floor. She didn't even bend down to pick it up. Rebecca looked at them, bewildered. She'd expected polite nods, maybe a "thank you for coming," probably a gentle letdown. She hadn't expected this. She stood up from the bench slowly, almost carefully, like her legs might not hold her. She started, then stopped. "What do you say when people are standing and applauding and crying?" "Thank you." The man held up his hand for quiet, and gradually the applause died down. He cleared his throat twice before speaking, and even then his voice came out rough. Ms. Walsh, I'm sorry, I don't know." "Rebecca is fine," she said quietly. "Rebecca." He cleared his throat again. "In my 41 years of judging auditions, I have never, I mean to say—" He stopped, seeming to struggle for words, which was clearly unusual for him. He looked at his fellow judges as if asking for help. The older woman stepped forward. She'd put her glasses back on, but her eyes were still wet behind them. "My dear, I think we need to ask you some questions. Would you mind sitting down?" "Not at the piano." "Here, please." She gestured to a chair that had been pushed against the wall. Rebecca walked over to the chair, her legs feeling strange, almost numb. The assistant rushed to bring the chair closer to the judge's table. Rebecca sat, and suddenly she felt very small, very aware of her department store dress and her messy hair and the fact that she was 52 years old and probably looked every day of it. The younger judge held up her phone, the screen still showing that article from 1992. "Is this you?" Rebecca looked at the photo of her younger self and felt something twist in her chest. "Yes, that's me. A long time ago." "You won the Van Cliburn competition," the older woman said. It wasn't a question, but Rebecca nodded anyway. "You performed with the London Symphony Orchestra, the Berlin Philharmonic. You were recording an album." "I was supposed to," Rebecca corrected gently. "We'd started discussions about it, but it never happened." "Why?" The question came from the man, and it wasn't accusatory. It was genuine, confused. "What happened?" "You just disappeared. I remember hearing about you back then. Everyone was talking about this young American pianist who was going to be the next big thing. And then you were just gone. Rebecca looked down at her hands, at the fingers that had just produced all that music. They looked old now. The veins visible under thin skin, a few age spots starting to appear. But they'd done their job today. They'd remembered. My husband got sick, she said simply. We were young, just married. He was 24. Brain tumor. They gave him 2 years, maybe 3 if the treatment worked. The room went very quiet again, but a different kind of quiet than before. The younger judge set her phone down softly. The treatment required him to stay in the States near the hospital. I was supposed to be touring Europe, then Asia. I was supposed to be recording in Vienna. I was supposed to be doing a lot of things. Rebecca smiled, but it was sad around the edges. But he needed me more than the world needed another pianist. So I came home. How long? The older woman started to ask, then stopped, as if afraid of the answer. He lived for 8 years, longer than anyone expected. We had 8 more years together. Rebecca's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. She'd told this story before to friends, to her children, to herself on the hard days. We moved to Iowa near his family. I started teaching piano to help pay the medical bills. Just a few students at first from the neighborhood, then more. By the time he passed, I had almost 40 students. And you never went back? The man asked. To performing, I mean, after he died? Rebecca shook her head. By then I had 3 kids who needed their mom. And honestly, I love teaching, still do. My students, they're not trying to be the next concert pianist. Most of them just want to play music, to have something beautiful in their lives. There's something pure about that. The younger judge leaned forward. But you kept playing. You had to play like that. That level of skill doesn't just happen. Rebecca smiled for real this time. Late at night after everyone went to bed. That was my time. I'd sit at our old upright piano in the living room and play, quietly so I wouldn't wake the kids. Sometimes I'd play the pieces I used to perform. Sometimes I'd play whatever I felt like. It kept me sane, I think, during the hard years. Why now? The older woman asked softly. Why come here now after all this time? Rebecca thought about that message from her former student, the one who'd challenged her about her own dreams. She thought about her empty house, about being 52 years old and wondering what came next. She thought about her husband, who used to love sitting in the audience when she performed, who told her before he died that he was sorry he'd taken her career away from her. I told him he didn't take anything, Rebecca said out loud, though she was really talking to a memory. I chose it. I'd choose it again. But he made me promise that someday when I could, I'd play on a big stage one more time. For him, for me, for whoever wanted to listen. The 3 judges exchanged looks. The man picked up his pen, then set it back down. The older woman removed her glasses and cleaned them slowly, though they weren't dirty. The younger judge scrolled through more articles on her phone, reading quickly. You know, the man said finally, we've been judging this audition series for Carnegie Hall's summer concert program. It's competitive. We see about 200 pianists every year. We choose maybe 10 or 12 to perform. Rebecca nodded. She knew the odds. That's why she'd made the joke about embarrassing herself when she first walked in. The thing is, he continued, we're not just looking for technical skill. We can find dozens of pianists who can play the notes correctly. What we're looking for is something more. An artist who can make people feel something. Someone who has a story to tell through their music. The older woman picked up where he left off. What you just played, Rebecca, that wasn't just Rachmaninoff. That was your story. Every note of it. The joy of being young and talented. The pain of loss. The sacrifice. The love, the patience, the hope. I could hear all of it. I've been doing this for 35 years, the younger judge added, still looking at her phone. I thought I'd seen everything. But I've never seen someone disappear from the classical music world at the height of their career, and then come back 3 decades later playing better than they did before. How is that even possible? Rebecca shrugged slightly. I never stopped loving it. And when you love something that much, you find ways to keep it alive even when life gets in the way. Besides, teaching made me a better musician. You learn so much when you have to explain music to someone else. When you have to find 50 different ways to describe what a crescendo should feel like, or how to make a phrase sing. The man stood up again, but this time he walked around the table and approached Rebecca. He held out his hand and she stood to shake it, confused. Ms. Walsh, Rebecca, we're not supposed to tell contestants our decision right away. We're supposed to deliberate, Compare all the auditions, be fair and methodical about it. He paused, still holding her hand. But I'm breaking that rule right now. On behalf of Carnegie Hall and everyone here, I want to formally invite you to perform in our summer concert series. Rebecca's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at the other judges, certain this must be a mistake. The older woman smiled, a real warm smile that crinkled her whole face. He's serious. We all are. We want you to perform, not in some small recital hall or late-night slot. A main stage performance, full orchestra backing, the works. Rebecca tried to form words, but they wouldn't come. Her eyes started to burn with tears she'd been holding back for 33 years. I don't know what to say. Say yes, the younger judge said, grinning. Please say yes. The world needs to hear you play again. Rebecca looked at each of their faces. She thought about her husband, who never got to see her play at Carnegie Hall. She thought about her kids who only knew their mom as a piano teacher in Iowa. She thought about her students who she'd always encouraged to follow their dreams. She thought about that 21-year-old girl in the newspaper photo and how far she'd traveled to get back to this moment. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, I'd be honored. The bus ride back to Iowa felt completely different from the ride to New York. Rebecca sat in the same uncomfortable seat, watched the same highway signs pass by, ate the same kind of stale sandwich from a rest stop. But everything had changed. She kept touching the folder in her lap, the one with the contract and the performance schedule and all the official Carnegie Hall paperwork, just to make sure it was real. Her phone had died somewhere in Pennsylvania, which was probably for the best. She needed time to think, to process what had just happened before she told anyone. The other passengers on the bus slept or watched movies on their phones or stared out the window. None of them knew that the ordinary-looking woman in seat 14B had just been invited to perform at one of the most famous concert halls in the world. When she finally got home 30 hours later, exhausted and rumpled, the house felt different too. It was still the same small two-story she'd lived in for 27 years. The same crack in the front walkway that she kept meaning to fix, the same slightly croaky screen door. But now it felt less like a place where dreams went to die and more like a place where they'd been hibernating, waiting for the right moment to wake up. She dropped her backpack by the door and went straight to her piano. It was an old upright, nothing fancy, with scratched wood and keys that stuck sometimes. She'd bought it used when her oldest was 5 and had been meaning to replace it for years but never got around to it. Now she sat down on the worn bench and just rested her hands on the keys without playing. I did it, she said out loud to the empty house. I actually did it. Then she put her head down on the keys and cried. Big, messy sobs that came from somewhere deep down, releasing 3 decades of held-back emotion. The keys made discordant sounds under her forehead, but she didn't care. She cried for her younger self who'd given up her dreams. She cried for her husband who never got to see this moment. She cried for all the years in between. And she cried from pure joy, because somehow, impossibly, she'd gotten a second chance. Her phone had charged enough to turn on, and immediately it started buzzing with messages. Her kids wondering if she was okay, if the audition had gone well when she'd be home. Her sister who wanted details. A few of her students who somehow already heard she'd gone to New York and were excited to know what happened. She texted her 3 children first. I'm home. I'm fine. Can you all video call tomorrow? I have news. The responses came back immediately. Her oldest daughter. Mom, you can't just say that. Tell us now. Her middle son. Good news or bad news? Her youngest. Did you meet anyone famous? Did they like your playing? Rebecca smiled and typed back, tomorrow. I promise. Love you all. She made herself a cup of tea and sat at her kitchen table with the folder reading through everything again. The concert was scheduled for August 15th, 3 months away. They wanted her to perform the full Rachmaninoff Second Concerto, all 3 movements with the Carnegie Hall Orchestra. There would be rehearsals, promotional materials, interviews. Her name would be in programs and on the website. The next morning, she set up her laptop at the kitchen table and called her kids. All 3 of them appeared on the screen, calling in from different cities. Her daughter in Chicago, her older son in Denver, her youngest calling from his college dorm room. Okay, Mom, the suspense is killing us, her daughter said, before Rebecca could even say hello. How did it go? Rebecca took a breath. She'd been practicing what to say, but now the words felt stuck. They offered me a spot in the summer concert series. Silence on the screen. All three faces frozen in identical expressions of shock. Wait, what? Her older son said finally. Like actually performing? At Carnegie Hall? At Carnegie Hall, Rebecca confirmed. And saying it out loud made it feel real in a way it hadn't before. August 15th. Full concert with orchestra. Her daughter screamed. Actually screamed so loud that Rebecca had to turn down the volume. Mom, oh my God. Mom. That's insane, her youngest said, and his eyes were getting wet. Mom, that's incredible. I can't believe. I can believe it because you're amazing, but also I can't believe it. We're all coming, her daughter declared. I don't care what it costs, we're all flying to New York. We're going to be in the front row. We're going to clap so loud. They talked for over an hour, her kids asking questions faster than she could answer them. What would she wear? Would it be recorded? Could they bring friends? Did this mean she was famous now? Rebecca laughed more in that hour than she had in months, feeding off their excitement, letting herself feel proud of what she'd accomplished. After she hung up, she sat for a long time just thinking. Then she opened her laptop and started typing emails. The first one went to all of her current students and their parents. Dear families, she wrote, I wanted to let you know about something that happened this week. I auditioned at Carnegie Hall and was invited to perform in their summer concert series. I'll be taking a brief break from lessons in early August for rehearsals, but don't worry, we'll make up any missed sessions. I'm telling you this not to brag, but because I want your children to know that it's never too late to chase a dream. Some of you know my story, how I used to perform before I became a teacher. I thought that part of my life was over. Turns out it was just on pause. Keep practicing, keep believing in yourselves, and who knows what might happen. With gratitude, Rebecca. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The responses started coming in within minutes, parents congratulating her, students sending excited messages with lots of exclamation points. One mother wrote, My daughter has been crying happy tears for the past 10 minutes. You've taught her piano for 8 years, and she's always looked up to you. Now she's saying she wants to practice every day, so she can be like you. Thank you for showing her that dreams don't have expiration dates. Rebecca had to stop reading the messages because she was crying again. Over the next few days, word spread through her small town faster than she ever expected. The local newspaper called asking for an interview. The grocery store clerk congratulated her. People she barely knew stopped her on the street to tell her how proud they were. The high school music teacher asked if she'd be willing to talk to his students about her journey. You're kind of a celebrity now, her neighbor told her with a grin. Our town's own concert pianist. That's pretty cool. But the message that meant the most came a week later from a student she'd taught 15 years ago, the one who'd sent her the audition information in the first place. Mrs. Walsh, the email read, I heard the news and I've been smiling all day. Do you remember when I was 16 and I told you I wanted to quit piano because I wasn't good enough? You told me that music wasn't about being the best, it was about having something that made your soul feel alive. You said the world needed people who played music for the love of it, not just for competition or career. Those words changed my life. I kept playing and now I teach music too. I sent you that audition link as a joke, but also as a challenge. I wanted you to take your own advice. I'm so incredibly happy that you did. You deserve this. You've always deserved this. Rebecca read the email 3 times, then printed it out and put it on her refrigerator. The weeks that followed were a blur. There were phone calls with Carnegie Hall staff about logistics. She had to decide what to wear and ended up buying her first new formal dress in probably a decade. She practiced every day, not just the Rachmaninoff, but everything, getting her hands back into the shape they needed to be for a major performance. Her fingers ached at first. She'd kept up her playing over the years, but not at this intensity. There were moments of doubt, usually late at night when she'd wonder if she'd made a mistake. What if she failed? What if the audition had been a fluke? What if she got on that stage and forgot everything? But then she'd remember the feeling of playing in that audition room. The way the music had flowed through her like it had never left. The looks on the judges' faces, the standing ovation, and she'd push the doubt aside and keep practicing. One evening in mid-July, about a month before the performance, she was working through a particularly difficult passage when her phone rang. It was the younger judge from the audition, the one who'd been scrolling through articles on her phone. Rebecca, hi. I hope I'm not bothering you. I wanted to check in and see how the preparation is going. They talked for a while about the music, about the rehearsal schedule, about technical details. Then the judge said something that caught Rebecca off guard. I've been thinking about your story a lot, about the choice you made, giving up your career for your family. I'm 34, and I've spent my entire adult life focused on my career. Sometimes I wonder if I've missed out on other things that matter. Does that make sense? Rebecca thought carefully before answering. I don't think it's about career versus family, or about one choice being right and another being wrong. It's about figuring out what matters most to you in each season of your life. For me, at 23, being with my husband mattered more than anything, and I don't regret it. But now at 52, I'm in a different season. My kids are grown. I have time for myself again. Both things can be true. That's really helpful, the judge said quietly. Thank you. After they hung up, Rebecca sat at her piano and smiled. Maybe this whole thing wasn't just about her getting a second chance. Maybe it was about showing other people that life doesn't follow a straight line, that you can have different dreams at different times, that giving something up doesn't mean it's gone forever. She placed her hands on the keys and started playing, not the Rachmaninoff this time, but a simple melody her husband used to love. She played it soft and slow, and in her mind she could see him sitting in his favorite chair, listening, smiling, telling her how proud he was. I wish you could be there, she said to the empty room, but I'll play for both of us. August 15th arrived faster than Rebecca expected and slower than she could bear, all at the same time. She'd flown to New York 3 days early for rehearsals with the orchestra. Standing on the Carnegie Hall stage for the first time, looking out at the empty seats, she'd felt so small she almost couldn't breathe. The conductor was a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and an even sharper sense of timing. During the first rehearsal, she'd stopped the orchestra halfway through the second movement. You're holding back, she'd said, not unkindly. I can hear it. You're playing perfectly, but you're afraid. What are you afraid of? Rebecca had looked down at the piano keys, at her hands that suddenly felt like they belonged to someone else. I don't know. Maybe that I don't deserve to be here, that this is all a mistake. The conductor had walked over to the piano and sat down on the bench next to her, which was unusual enough that several orchestra members looked up from their instruments. Let me tell you something, the conductor said quietly. I've worked with a lot of pianists, young prodigies who've been groomed since they were 5, established professionals who've played every major hall in the world, and you know what most of them are missing? Life, real life, pain and joy and sacrifice and love. They can play the notes beautifully, but they don't understand what the music is really about. You do. So stop apologizing for being here and just play. The second rehearsal had gone better. The third one better still. By the final rehearsal that morning, Rebecca and the orchestra were moving together like they'd been playing together for years. Now it was 6 in the evening, 2 hours before the performance. Rebecca stood in her dressing room looking at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her wore an elegant dark blue gown that her daughter had helped her pick out. Her gray hair was styled in a way that looked sophisticated instead of messy. She looked like a concert pianist. She felt like a fraud. There was a knock on the door. Come in, she called, expecting it to be a stage manager with a time update. Instead, all 3 of her children tumbled in, talking over each other in their excitement. Mom, the hall is packed, her older son said, like completely full. There's not an empty seat anywhere. We met some of your old students in the lobby, her daughter added. There's like 15 of them here. They made a banner that says, "We love you, Mrs. Walsh." It's adorable and also slightly embarrassing. Her youngest gave her a long hug. How are you feeling? Are you nervous? You're going to be amazing. Terrified, Rebecca admitted. What if I mess up? What if I freeze? What if everyone realizes I'm just a piano teacher from Iowa who has no business being here? Her daughter took both of Rebecca's hands and looked her straight in the eyes. Mom, do you remember when I was 12 and I had that big solo in the school musical? I was so scared I was throwing up backstage. And you told me something that I've never forgotten. You said fear means you care. It means this matters. And the only way to get through it is to focus on why you're doing it in the first place. So why are you doing this? Rebecca thought about it. For your father. For myself. For all the years I spent telling students to be brave while I played it safe. For everyone who thinks it's too late to chase what they love. Then that's what you focus on, her son said. Not the audience. Not the critics. Just that. They stayed with her for another 10 minutes, filling the small dressing room with their energy and love and terrible jokes that made her laugh despite her nerves. When they finally left to take their seats, Rebecca felt steadier. Not calm, but steadier. She sat down at the small table in the dressing room and pulled out her phone. She'd been carrying the same photo in her wallet for 7 years, but she'd recently had it scanned. It was a picture of her husband from before he got sick, sitting at their old piano, grinning at the camera. She looked at it for a long moment. "Wish me luck," she whispered. The stage manager knocked. 15 minutes, Ms. Walsh." Rebecca took one last look in the mirror, smoothed down her dress, and walked out into the hallway. She could hear the murmur of the audience through the walls, hundreds and hundreds of people all gathering in one place. For a moment, the old panic tried to rise up in her chest, but she pushed it down. She'd come too far to back out now. The stage manager led her to the wings where she could peek out and see the stage. The orchestra was already seated, musicians tuning their instruments in that chaotic symphony of sound that happens before every performance. The piano sat center stage under a spotlight, gleaming and perfect. The conductor found her in the wings. "Ready?" "No," Rebecca said honestly. "But I'm going anyway." The conductor smiled. "That's the spirit." The lights in the hall dimmed. The audience noise faded to silence. Rebecca's heart hammered so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. The conductor walked out onto the stage to applause, then turned and gestured for Rebecca to join her. This was it. This was the moment. Rebecca took a deep breath and walked out onto the stage. The applause was immediate and warm. She walked to the piano, and the lights were so bright she could barely see the audience, which was probably for the best. She sat down at the bench, adjusted it slightly, and placed her hands on the keys. They were shaking. She pressed her fingers down gently, feeling the familiar resistance of the keys grounding herself. The conductor raised her baton. The orchestra lifted their instruments. Rebecca closed her eyes for just a second, and in that second she wasn't 52 years old on a Carnegie Hall stage. She was 21 and fearless. She was 30 and sitting by a hospital bed. She was 40 and teaching a student their first concerto. She was every age she'd ever been, all at once. The conductor's baton came down. The orchestra began, and Rebecca started to play. The first movement poured out of her with a power she didn't know she had. Every difficult passage she'd worried about flowed smoothly. Every emotion she'd lived through in the past 33 years came through in the music. The orchestra supported her perfectly, and the conductor guided them all with precise, expressive movements. When the first movement ended, there was a brief pause before the second movement began. In that pause, Rebecca heard it. Silence so complete it felt sacred, 2,000 people holding their breath. The second movement was softer, more lyrical, full of longing and beauty. Rebecca let herself get lost in it. Forgot about the audience, forgot about everything except the music and what it meant to her. This was the section she'd played late at night when her children were sleeping, when she needed to remember who she was underneath everything else. The third movement exploded with energy and joy. Her hands flew across the keys. The orchestra swelled behind her, and everything came together in a way that felt like magic. This was why she'd fallen in love with music in the first place. This feeling of being part of something bigger than yourself, of connecting with people through sound and emotion in ways that words never could. The final notes approached. The moment she'd been building toward for 3 months, for 33 years, maybe for her entire life. The orchestra and piano came together in one massive, glorious chord that seemed to shake the entire building. Rebecca's hands came down hard on the keys, putting everything she had into that final sound. And then it was over. Her hands lifted from the keys. The last vibrations of sound faded into silence. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Rebecca sat very still, not sure what came next. Then the audience exploded. People leaped to their feet. The sound of applause was like thunder, like a storm, like joy made audible. Rebecca stood up slowly, turned toward the audience, and finally let herself see them. Rows and rows of people on their feet, clapping, cheering, some wiping their eyes. She saw her children in the third row jumping and hollering. She saw her former students holding their banner and crying happy tears. She saw strangers moved by music they'd just experienced together. The conductor came over and hugged her, then gestured for the orchestra to stand. They did, and they were applauding too, tapping their bows against their music stands in the traditional orchestra gesture of respect and appreciation. Rebecca felt tears on her own cheeks but didn't bother to wipe them away. She bowed once, twice, 3 times. The applause didn't stop. Someone in the audience yelled, "Bravo," and others picked it up. The conductor had to gently push Rebecca forward to take another bow. Finally, after what felt like forever, Rebecca walked off the stage. The moment she was in the wings, out of sight of the audience, her knees went weak. She sat down right there on the floor, not caring about her elegant dress, and just breathed. The stage manager brought her water. Other performers waiting for their turn came over to congratulate her. But Rebecca barely heard any of it. She was still somewhere in the music, still feeling the weight and wonder of what had just happened. Her children found her 20 minutes later, still sitting backstage, surrounded by people but somehow alone in her thoughts. "Mom," her daughter said softly, kneeling down beside her, "you did it. You really did it." Rebecca looked up at her 3 children, at their proud faces and happy tears, and she started laughing. Not hysterical laughter, but the kind that comes from pure joy, from relief, from the sudden realization that you've done something you were terrified to do and survived it, and maybe even conquered it. "I did, didn't I?" she said, and it sounded like wonder. Later that night, after all the congratulations and the small reception and the countless photos, Rebecca found herself alone in her hotel room. She sat on the edge of the bed, still in her concert dress, holding her phone. She pulled up that photo of her husband one more time. "We did it," she told him. "I kept my promise. I played on a big stage, and it was everything I hoped it would be." She thought about going home to Iowa, to her piano students and her quiet life. But now that life would have a new chapter in it. Now she could tell her students with complete honesty that dreams don't have expiration dates, that sometimes you have to put them on hold, but that doesn't mean they're gone. That second chances exist if you're brave enough to take them. Rebecca finally stood up and went to the window. New York City sprawled out below her, millions of lights in the darkness. Somewhere out there were 2,000 people who'd heard her play tonight. Some of them would forget by tomorrow, but some of them would remember. Some of them might be inspired to dust off their own old dreams. She smiled at her reflection in the window glass. The woman looking back at her was 52 years old with gray hair and laugh lines. A piano teacher from Iowa, a widow, a mother, and now once again a concert pianist. All of it was true. All of it was her. And that was exactly how it should be.